Yo, 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 what's good? Sephiroth here, and today I'm going to be showing you a plugin by Unfiltered Audio called Silo. It's by Unfiltered Audio. They make a lot of great plugins. Silo, what do you keep in a silo? Grain. It's a granular plugin. Pretty unique one. I guess the closest plugin to Silo, I would say, would be something like Portal or the one that Arturia put out. But Silo is still pretty unique. So I've prepared a loop here in Ableton. Sounds like this. So let's go ahead and put Silo on this group here, the melodics group. I'm going to just duplicate the MIDI over here so we can hear it. So when you throw Silo on something, by default it sounds like this. So first I'll play this group without Silo, and then I'll turn Silo on. Alright, now I'm going to turn Silo on. So you can hear that it's doing reverb things and also cutting things up into grains and replaying them. So I'm going to go through from left to right. You can turn each module on and off here with the button. It says on and off. And these are 3 different modules that are going to give you interesting results, even just on their own. So once you understand these modules, you can whip them out and just use 1, 2, or 3 all at once. And let's start with the granular module. So I'll turn the other ones off so we can just hear the granular module. And you have 4 main controls up here. You have size, which is going to be the grain size. You're going to have rate, which is how fast the grains are playing, one after another. You have pitch, which is going to take those grains and pitch them around. And speed, which is going to be how fast it's recording. So here, down here at the bottom, you can see that's going to be your visual representation of the buffer. How much of the audio that's coming into the plugin is recorded at any time before it deletes that and records a new segment for you to keep replaying. And so with these 3 controls, you're going to be able to control what kind of granular behavior you're getting. So I'm going to play around with these so that you can hear them in action. So you can hear that once I turn the rate down slower than the size of each grain, you can hear the space between each grain. So if I start turning the size down, we're going to get little bitty grains. And as I turn the speed down, it's not going to really change much. So you can see what's happening with the speed here is it's starting to miss some of the audio coming through. If I retap and have it at 1, it's gonna more seamlessly represent what's coming through it. As where I turn the speed down, we're gonna start hearing some of the older audio and missing some of the newer audio as it plays through, because it's still playing from that previous section. Hopefully, if that makes sense. You don't have to understand that too much yet. But basically, that's the granular thing. You're recording the audio coming in and then playing it back at a given size and speed, pitch. And now let's move down to these little drop downs, because this is very interesting. You can have, for the size, time. You can also have it by ratio, P ratio, which is identical to ratio, except that changing the pitch will also change the calculated length of each grain, which is pretty interesting. And whenever you want to learn anything about this plugin, you can just hover over it and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. So what I really like about this plugin is you can divide things by tempo. So if we do tempo now, you see we have divisions of the master tempo, 16th notes, 8th notes, etc. So if we do 16th note, you're going to start hearing a chop at a rhythmic tempo, which is interesting because we have a lot of interesting rhythmic stuff happening in this melodic sequence I have. So you can hear there, the grains are perfect 16th note sized grains. So if we go here to the rate now, the rate at which they're playing back, we can switch that to tempo, and then we could maybe do 16th again. And if we have 16th on both, we should hear it pretty seamlessly playing back the audio. So you can hear slight space, and that has to do with this window. See the window shape? There's all these different shapes we can do. If we do tucky, then we can use the little shape knob to get less space between each grain or more. There's a variable shape for each of these shapes. You can see you can tweak the shape and you'll get different effects, which is really cool. So let's make a big grain, and if we reset the speed, then we're going to hear an even more seamless playback. So you could hear it was holding the audio, but if the speed is at 1, then it's going to be just playing back at the given speed of the audio coming in more seamlessly. So let's hear that. So you can see as we reduce the speed here, we're going to get more of a beat repeat effect. So let me do that now. So you can see there, as we turn the speed down to 0, 0 is going to be playing each grain for the length of the buffer. We can change the length of the buffer here. We have samples, we have time, which is going to be millisecond values. Samples are like your sample rate. And then tempo. So let's do tempo. Let's try 16th. Oh, we don't have 16th, but let's do 8th. And let's hear that. So you can see there now, for every quarter note, it's playing 2 grains because we have it set to 16th. So the buffer length is actually very important. So we can mask the grains here. This mask applies a rhythmic Euclidean mask to generation of the grains. So if I scroll up, click and scroll, you can see now the black grains are going to be the ones that are going to play, and then the space is going to actually mute that grain. So now we'll get an interesting sort of Euclidean rhythm going on via the division. We can change this to tempo. So let's go 8th note. And let's hear that. So really interesting rhythms that way, especially when you start setting the size and rate to different speeds. But let's move now down to this next thing. Now this little window, you can click and you can have a percentage value. And this is the grain size deviation. So it sets the amount of length randomization that occurs with each grain. So now it's going to randomly start to change this knob. It's basically going to randomly modulate this knob more or less depending on the amount you set. So if we set a little randomness to this rate, you're going to start hearing the rhythm randomly changing. And you can see that there, the speed of this going around the circle is changing, so that's a nice visual representation of the random modulation being applied to the rate. We could also randomly modulate the size here, and now we're going to get different sized grains at a random amount. So pretty cool stuff, right? But it's all pretty stereo. So let's move down here to these next functions. Now this is very interesting. We're going to be able to spread the grains. This is going to detune the left ear from the right ear, adds a slight speed difference between grains on the left and right channels. So speed, we're going to hear it as sort of a detuning. So super cool sound, gives you a lot of nice width. The next one is reverse, sets the probability that individual grains will be reversed. So probability, that's another random function. So every few of these will start to play in reverse, which is really cool. So let's hear that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. The shape I already talked about, tweaks the shape of the window, the grain size window, and the last is freeze, determines how much old data will be rewritten to the grain buffer. So it'll start holding on to the older stuff and sort of overlapping. So let's hear that. So super cool. That holds on to some of the older stuff. Now, these next few are momentary on-off switches. Now, keep in mind, everything in this plugin can be modulated with the automation or Max for Live LFO. That's when you start to really get a lot of interesting complexity out of this thing, but we're not going to worry about that yet. We have pause grains when active. No new grains will be generated. New data will still be written to the buffer. So you can pause the grains, but it'll keep recording underneath that so that when you unpause the grains, you'll have the new stuff right away. Whereas pause write, when active, no new data will be written to the buffer. Grains will be generated. So when active, it won't be writing anything new, basically just holding on to whatever has already been recorded, and then clear will clear it. The current contents of the recording buffer, it erases. All right, so that's the Granular engine. Pretty basic, but also got some unique things, especially with this random built in, as well as the rhythmic divisions, which you don't find in most Granular plugins. Okay, so that's just the first window, right? So let's mute that window. Now let's turn off that window. We'll turn on the next module window, which is the spatializer. Now this thing is really interesting. Basically, you have geometry, which is going to be a bunch of different geometric layouts for these little circles. Each of these circles represents the area in the stereo field at which the grain is going to be played back in. So as I increase the range, we go wider and wider. Now, the higher in this top half of the circle it is, the louder the grain is, and the lower in the circle, the quieter the grain is. Left and right is going to be on the stereo field, so panned left and right. So those two together create movement in the stereo field. So if I turn jump down, it's not going to jump to the next region, whereas if I turn jump up and then turn the velocity up, the velocity is going to be the speed of that geometry movement, and then jump is going to be jumping between each. You see the jump's not working because jump works in tandem with the Granular engine. So if I turn the Granular engine back on, now you can see it's jumping around. The green is jumping from thing to thing. So let's hear the spatializer on its own. But you can see that the green's not even really moving. So this really works in tandem with the Granular. So let's actually have the Granular on and the spatializer. And now you'll hear each grain is being played at a subtly different area of the stereo field, as well as moving around depending on whatever movement we have set here. What's up?
You let me in the front door. I left my keys and I'll exit.
Oh yeah. Hold on, I gotta pause this real quick. What's up, Gooch? Yeah, I'm like doing a stream. Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah, so the geometry basically gives you way more interesting kind of Doppler type effects. Right, So a lot of crazy stuff starts to happen once you combine these two. And then on the end of the chain, you have a reverb. And this is a really interesting reverb. So let's take away some of the mask here. So every grain's going to play. Let's turn the locations, range, velocity, and jump down so we have a lot less panning. And now you'll really be able to hear this reverb in action. So I'll turn the reverb on. You have a few different options for how the reverb mixes. You can read all this stuff. I'm not going to go into everything here, but basically different ways of mixing it. Then you have the level of the reverb. You have the reverb type, which is going to be the tone. These are different reverb algorithms that sound slightly different. And then this is really interesting. So this knob will change depending on what this is set at. If it's set at volume, you just have the reverb volume. If you set it to chance, then you have a chance amount. So it might or might not put reverb on the grains. So let me get a consistent grain chop going first, and then I'll show you what this reverb thing is doing. So I just basically reset the granular engine to be in a more simple position by turning down the reverse, spread, making a smaller shape, putting the speed back to 1, and then the rate at 8, and the size to 16, so there's a good amount of space between each grain so we can really hear this reverb. Now if I turn the reverb on and we have it set to chance, I'll start with 0 and then start to increase this, and you'll hear more and more of those grains are going to have reverb, but not all of them. So super cool. That makes for a lot of fun. If you want something a little more dependable, you can put it on mask. And this is going to change this to a Euclidean mask like we saw here. So every fourth will have grains there. Every other one here, like every few, this is a different Euclidean mask. Every sixth, etc., etc. So then we have variation, which is interesting. Variation is going to, each grain is sent to the reverb at a random level between 0 and x, where x is the value of the level control. The level control turns into a mask control to rhythmically modify which grains are sent to the reverb. So it's going to start to sort of, oh, sorry, I read mask after that, but the variation is going to start to randomly vary the amount of volume of each grain that goes into the reverb. So they'll all have reverb, but different amounts of reverb, right? So let's keep this on chance, because that's my favorite. And I'm going to start to tweak this reverb. This reverb is fairly tweakable. You have decay, distance, which is sort of like size, and damping. So as I turn damping up, you're going to get less and less crazy stereo in the reverb, and it's going to sound more tonal, almost like a delay network, which is really what's going on underneath the hood probably. So let's hear some tweaking of the reverb now. So you can see as I turn the distance up, we get more sort of diffusion in the reverb, and then damping starts to take away some of the highs of the reverb. It almost sounds like there's a low pass filter modulation on it or something. Then you have a filter underneath here. So we have a percentage of the amount of the filter. This sets the amount of filtering that occurs between the granular and the reverb. So we'll filter the reverb less or more, and then you have a few different types of filter, high pass and low pass. And then you have the resonance, which is self-explanatory, and you have an invert button. So you can invert the reverb. Inverts the topology of the filter, dramatically changing the sound. As an example, this will turn a low-pass filter into a high-pass filter. Keep in mind this is all modulatable, which is really great. So I can start to filter this reverb. Let's do that. Now I'm going to try some different mix options here. And this will change the sound of how the grain overlaps with that reverb. So solo is going to mute the grain and have only the reverb. Normal is the reverb is active. And then balance is going to be the level of the reverb is adjusted to complement the level of the dry grains that are not sent to the reverb. Try this mode when the reverb level mode is set to variation or mask. So let's try balance because we're using chance. So you can see when it's set to normal, the grains are always the same volume, whereas balance, the grains are kind of changing in volume depending on which ones of the grains have the reverb. So it kind of brings the reverb more to the forefront. Right. So there's so many ways to use this plugin. I hope that plugin makes sense now. And I'll show you kind of how I like to use this depending on like a type of element. So it can be really great for just adding more space and interest to a sound. You can mix it in parallel and it becomes like a trippy, moving, modulated reverb thing. It's really great for resampling too and just getting a bunch of cool samples if you resample the output. And there's one little Easter egg in this plugin that most people may not know, and that is if you grab a sample, pretty sure you can drag it right in. See, that didn't actually work though. I could have sworn you could drag a sample into this. It's pretty weird that it doesn't let me. Let me try on a new channel here. I feel like I read that was a possibility, but maybe it's not. Could have sworn that was the case. That would be cool. Huh, see, now it's not letting me do it, whereas before it was sort of letting me do it. Maybe if I have it in the project first? Okay, well, I guess that was a buzzkill there, but yeah, there's so many cool ways you can use this plugin, and really modulating it is really how you're going to take it to the next level, but you don't really even need to modulate it. You can get enough randomness in with just these modulators and these different options. So really great sound for sound design. Let's hear it in context of the beat. So I have a bass line and things, and let's hear it on this. can see there, I was just kind of modulating the mix amount and finding a cool rhythmic chop to add cool fills and stuff. But if I were actually going to do that to this loop, I would probably just have it fully wet on the mix and then just resample the output or something like that. You can be as destructive or as preservative as you want with this thing. I'll probably be doing more videos on this thing that are like more creative, but I wanted to do an overview. So yeah, that's the overview. I hope you really understand the plugin now. And yeah, let me know if you have any cool ideas, comments, questions, etc. And yeah, thanks for watching. Till next time, I'm Sephiros, and big up, big up, big up, peace.